This is a build for the Druid mastery of the Primalist class. It's based on being permanently transformed as a werebear and using one button to run around with the Rampage movement skill to demolish our foes. When we run around with Rampage, we automatically cast Stormbolt at our enemies, which means that you can sit back and relax and let everything around you be automatically primed. The gameplay in this video is with 394 corruption, but there's room for pushing it much further if you want. The Stormbolts are being automatically triggered when using Rampage by investing points in the Crackling Assault node of the werebear skill tree, giving one Stormbolt strike per second per point invested. Since we invest maximum points, we gain 5 Stormbolt strikes per second while rampaging. We utilize Stormbolt, spell and lightning tags to boost the damage of this skill, as well as building for critical strikes. One way to boost our spell damage immensely is by investing in the Wizened Claws node of the werebear skill, giving us 1 flat spell damage per point of strength. This is insanely good, as we now have a very good reason to stack as much strength as possible, since this will give us 4% increased armor per point in addition to the spell damage boost. After using Rampage, we also use Warcry automatically by investing in the Intimidating Cry node of the werebear skill. There are 2 great things about this, and that is that the Warcry use is instant, so there is no skill use delay when using the skill, as well as not having to remember using the skill manually all the time. In werebear form, Warcry is called Roar, but when you use it, it applies all the effects from the Warcry skill tree, which we'll have a look at now. Now, the first thing to note from the Warcry tree is that we want to reduce its cooldown as much as possible. This is why we invest in the Shallow Breath node to get the cooldown down to 5 seconds. This is because we want the benefits from using Warcry as often as possible, such as the Juggernaut node making us invulnerable for 1 second after each use, as well as healing ourselves and our Spriggan minion on use through the Breath of Terra and Invigorate nodes. This is vital to our own and our Spriggan minion survival, and we'll have a closer look at this later in this video. Now, whenever we automatically use Warcry after Rampage, we gain 4 stacks of Maelstrom, which is another crucial factor to our offensive setup. You see, whenever we reach 4 stacks of Maelstrom, we cast Stormbolt on an enemy each second. Add full points to the Energized node into the mix and you suddenly cast Stormbolt on 4 total targets each second. If you combine this with the Stormbolts cast from the werebear skill tree, we have a total of 9 Stormbolts being automatically cast each second, which is quite nice. We further reduce the total Maelstrom stacks needed to cast Stormbolt to 5 stacks by adding a point to the Strong Tides node. It is highly important to invest as many points as possible in the growing Storm node as well, for a chance to gain additional Maelstrom stacks frequently. Now, there's another huge benefit to having as many Maelstrom stacks as possible, which is obtained from the Rending Vortex node of the Gathering Storm skill tree. Now, this gives us 1% base critical strike chance per Maelstrom stack, and since we on average have around 10 Maelstrom stacks at any given time, this gives us 10% base critical strike chance, which is huge. It is crucial that we specialize in Gathering Storm, as all the bonuses from this tree apply to the Stormbolt skill, which is our main source of damage for this build. Finally, our Spriggan also boosts our attack immensely through the Aura of Kinship node, giving us 15 flat spell damage, as well as the Aura of Retribution node, giving us 8% increased base crit chance. Now, it's worth mentioning that Rampage and Maelstrom also do damage of their own, so try to run into enemies as much as you can to do additional damage. Rampage is a channeling skill, which means that we can take use of all modifiers giving bonuses while channeling. This is why we, for instance, have the increased damage while channeling modifier on our amulet. As you can see, we also have the lightning penetration modifier, which should be mandatory for our amulet, and the critical strike multiplier, which works well with our high spell crit chance. We get it this high by stacking spell critical strike chance, in this case mainly from our staff. We also stack as much increased spell damage as we can, in addition to strength. Finally, we also have increased lightning damage on some of our gear to increase our Stormbolt damage. We further boost our damage by going for the flat spell damage for Stormbolt on idols, as well as increased spell damage while transformed and increased lightning damage. A combination of increased critical strike chance and lightning damage also works very well. The only blessing we take to increase our damage is the flat spell damage while channeling, which can be obtained by defeating Herorot. Now, if you enjoyed this video so far, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to support me making future videos like this. I would highly appreciate your support. As for defense, we have several layers keeping us alive. I died once in my first echo with 100 corruption by recklessly running into a Wangari Spire, but apart from that I haven't died once, and currently sitting at 394 corruption. This is why this build should be highly viable for hardcore. Armor is an important defense mechanism for this build. We gain the flat armor from gear and increase it by investing quite heavily in strength. This way we have a baseline armor of over 3100, and while using Rampage this is increased to 4800 mainly due to our Patience of Hurker blessing giving us armor while channeling. This blessing bonus can be doubled if you get the Great Blessing of this type, increasing our armor even more. Health is another survival layer we need to talk about. Not only do we have a decent health pool of above 3100, but we also gain 10% of our total health as endurance threshold through the full points invested in the hide skin passive node. We get the same effect with the implicit stat of our helmet, giving us an additional 6% of our total health as endurance threshold, and this can be even rolled up to 10% if you're lucky. This helmet also gives us 16% endurance through the implicit stat and 26% through the explicit endurance modifier. In total, we end up with 1193 endurance threshold and 60% endurance, which is the maximum obtainable endurance. This means that all damage applied from our health dropping below our endurance threshold will be reduced by 60%. This keeps us from getting one-shotted, which is the main critical factor to staying alive on high corruption. Another way we reduce damage taken is by getting the aspect of the Boar after being hit by a melee attack, reducing the damage we take by 15% for 5 seconds after. We also invest full points in the Impervious passive node, giving our melee hits a 20% chance to give us a 4% hit damage reduction. This can stack up to 20% damage reduction with the max 5 stacks. This makes sense to invest in since Rampage has a melee tag, and is another good reason for actually bumping into enemies while using that skill. We also have a quite decent health regeneration of 385 per second. This would be boosted even further if we would get a higher roll of the Grand Rhythm of the Tide Blessing obtained from defeating Lagon, so there's even more room for improvement in this aspect. Another way we sustain our health is by getting the Grand Hunger of the Void Blessing obtained from defeating Raya. This gives us a health leech of 3.1% of the spell damage we inflict, which is a great way to sustain our health pool. Our critical strike avoidance of 72% is purely obtained through our Spriggan's Aura of Retribution node. This is another reason to keep the Spriggan alive as much as we can. With the Breath of Etera and Invigorate nodes from Warcry, it actually stays alive on high corruption in most cases. Since the Breath of Etera node also scales with increased healing effectiveness, this is a good reason to try to get increased healing effectiveness on either your gear or your items. The Natural Duality passive node from the Druid tree also helps with keeping our Spriggan alive, giving it 75% increased health. Now, the AI of the minions of this game is quite dumb, so for bosses on high corruption, the Spriggan will not survive. It will simply not move away from Lagon's Beam or Herod's Ice Storm. I hope the devs improve this in the future. However, we do have a very high critical strike chance without the Spriggan, so the thing we're missing when it's dead is the flat spell damage and the critical strike avoidance bonuses. In terms of resistances, they're quite decent apart from the void resistance. To solve this, we would ideally want the void resistance affix on our body armor instead of the useless dodge rating. The final and possibly the most important defensive layer to discuss is the movement speed of this build. We have a base movement speed of 57%, and with the haste we gain for both Warcry and Maelstrom constantly, our movement speed is more or less always at 87%, which is very good. This makes it easy to quickly get away from dangerous attacks. We obtain the high base movement speed through our Blood of the Exile boots. This has a base movement speed of 40% with our added prefix of 17% movement speed. Since this also has a high strength modifier giving us increased armor and flat spell damage, I found the high movement speed to be a good trade-off to not have additional suffixes on it. But it's possible to also add more affixes to these boots through more legendary potential. Now, if you enjoy this build guide, please make sure to hit the subscribe button to support me making more videos like this. And you'll definitely like the video showing on the screen right now, so go ahead and click on that.